On today's installment of Big Al's Garage, Big Al's Top 10 Classic Cars of the 90s. How y'all doing? I'm Big Al. Welcome to the garage. Today, I have a top 10 video that I've been wanting to do for quite some time. The 90s. The decade that gave us the Macarena, Pogs, the O.J. Simpson trial, and Bill Clinton not having sex with that woman. This decade also brought us a lot of cool cars. Well, guess what? Those cars are getting older, and they're like hella classic. Why are 90s cars so awesome? To get to that, we got to talk about the 3 decades leading up to the 90s. First off, the 60s are widely considered the golden age of the American muscle car. Big 3, I should say Big 4, AMC was still around at the time, would just about sell you a rocket ship on wheels. We were building some of the fastest, coolest cars ever produced. But there were storm clouds on the horizon. See, the government didn't like our muscle cars all that much. And in 1973, the first oil crisis hit and sent gas prices skyrocketing. At the same time, the first wave of safety and emission laws came into effect. Horsepower rates plummeted. American cars became big, underpowered land yachts whose gas-sucking V8s were strangled and choked by primitive emission controls. Or they were building subcompacts that had a tendency to rust out like, I'm going to steal this one from you, Casey Butch, an Alka-Seltzer tablet left out in the rain, Chevy Vega, or tended to, catch fire if hit from behind. Yes, the Ford Pinto was the original hot hatch. But by the 1980s, things were starting to look up. Nascent technology like electronic fuel injection and computer control were starting to bring horsepower numbers back up. By the time the 90s rolled around, that technology had caught up to the regulations and horsepower numbers started to climb again. In addition, we went from the boxy designs of the 70s and 80s, and designers started to use curves again. We started to have some really nice looking, fun to drive, great performing cars. Now, of course, I should say, just like the 60s, we tend to romanticize the performance cars of the 90s, and if you look over their specs, they're actually quite slow by modern standards. But, in many ways, the 90s were sort of a second golden age for cars. Whereas the 60s was the golden age of American muscle, the 90s was the golden age of Japanese performance, and you're going to find many Japanese cars on this list. In fact, there were so many cool and iconic cars that came out in the 90s, I'm going to have to do a second top 10 video on the topic, and I've already got 10 cars picked out. In order to get on this list, the criteria was very similar to my top 10 fuel-efficient classic car video. Has to be at least 25 years old, qualify for South Carolina antique plates, and be rare, desirable, and or iconic. I would also like to take a minute to thank the members of the 864 Car Community Facebook group who suggested many of the entries on this list. Without further ado, let's get to it. Number 10, the Generation 2 Mitsubishi Eclipse. This was produced from 1994 to 1998. You could get it in turbocharged or non-turbo variants, two-wheel drive, all-wheel drive variants. It was a great-looking, great-performing, fun car to drive. And, a little movie that maybe you've heard of, Fast and the Furious, really popularized the cars. In fact, Fast and the Furious may have been a bit of a double-edged sword for the Eclipse. While it did make it more popular, a lot of them have been tuned and modified, and I'm sad to say probably crashed. Think about it. When was the last time you saw one on the road? You are going to have to look long and hard to find a good, bone stock example. But if you do, I guarantee it is probably going to appreciate in value, and it is a true icon of the 90s. Number 9, the XJ Jeep Cherokee. These vehicles were produced in the 1980s all the way up to 1998. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong entry. They were manufactured until 2001. They featured AMC's 4-liter inline 6. Their values are climbing. These things were once ubiquitous but are starting to get rare, and prices are starting to climb. Expect to pay at least 10 grand for a nice example that hasn't been ragged out and destroyed. Their motors are pretty hard to kill. And this is another one of those iconic cars. Moving on, number 8, the BMW M3 E35. Manufactured from 1992 to 1999, featured a 3-liter or 3.2-liter inline 6, 316 horsepower. In the 90s, this was the ultimate driving machine. Number 7, Chevy and GMC OBS, that's old body style trucks. Produced from 1988 to 2002. If you've watched fellow YouTuber and South Carolinian's channel, Rob Pitts, you'll know that the values of these cars are white hot right now. I mean, that styling just screams 90s. Particularly popular variants are the short bed versions of the Sierra and Silverado. Number 6, the GMC Typhoon. Built only from 1992 to 1993. Only 4,697 of these were ever built. So expect to pay top dollar. For a good example, they featured a 4.3-liter turbocharged V6 and could producing 280 horsepower and accelerated from 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds. And yes, I will be covering its kissing cousin, the GMC Cyclone, in a subsequent video, so please don't rip me apart in the comments for that. These vehicles are definitely getting up there in value. You're going to have to look long and hard to find one, regardless of condition. Okay, number 5. As mentioned previously, the 90s were to Japanese performance what the 60s were to American muscle. And at number 5, we have the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. Unlike the Eclipse, which was produced by a partnership with Chrysler called Diamond Star Motors, Mitsubishi's 3000 GT was built in Japan solely by Mitsubishi. It featured all-wheel drive, a 3-liter V6 that came in both naturally aspirated or twin-turbo variants, and contained many other innovative features. The car may have suffered from some reliability issues back in the day, wasn't quite as popular as the Eclipse, so you're going to have to look long and hard to find a good example. But these things will definitely turn heads at car shows. And the Dodge Stealth, which was the car's virtual clone, was likewise built on Mitsubishi's assembly line in Japan. These are not a Diamond Star Motor product, although they are sometimes erroneously referred to as such. Number 4, another legendary Japanese performance car, the Acura Integra Type R. Introduced in 1995, putting out 187 horsepower, this popular tuning car is now commanding premium prices, one sold at auction for almost 6 figures, which I can't honestly understand. I mean, yes, this is revered as one of the best sports cars of the 90s, but they're not worth that much. I mean, you're paying Ferrari money at that point. But still, all around nice car, something we can all get nostalgic about. Number 3, yet another iconic Japanese sports car, the Nissan 240SX, produced from 1989 to 1999. Featured a 2.4-liter four-cylinder, sharp steering and handling, and today remains in demand as a popular drift and tuner car. A bone stock example may be hard to find and will definitely command some attention at car shows. Number 2, yet another Japanese icon, the Acura NSX. Built from 1990 to 2005, featured an all-aluminum body, a mid-engine VTEC V6, a supercar that delivered Honda reliability. Now, how can you beat that? The first generation is obviously the more popular of the two. The second generation is not nearly as popular. These cars just looked good, drove good, all around nice car and a true classic by every sense of the word. And now, our number 1 classic car of the 90s, the Dodge Viper. Built from 1991 to 2010 with a revival from 2013 to 2017, this car was a bare bones V10 powered monster that could accelerate from 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds, provided you didn't spin out when you took off. These cars are still in demand, values are climbing, and gas, well, is going to be a factor at this point, but these are true performance car icons of the 90s that could hold their own against any Ferrari or Lamborghini from the time period. Anyway, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you agree with my picks. We have 10 more classic cars of the 90s coming up at some point. And at some point I'm probably going to do a classic cars of the 80s video as well. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hopefully we will be back to work on the Corvair in my next video, if I don't do a live stream, which I'm strongly looking towards doing. Till then, I will see you next time.